name. So I'm Martijn Van Beek. I'm from Denmark, from Holland originally. I'm teaching at the University of Aarhus. And one of the people responsible for leading the Mind and Life Europe retreats.
Okay, so I'm Marieke Van Vugt. I'm an assistant professor in the AI department of the University of Groningen. And I'm also a board member of Mind and Life Europe, and I was fortunate enough to co-lead the MLE Retreat this year. I've been involved in Mind and Life for many years. In some sense, maybe I am a product of Mind and Life more generally.
So back in 2018, I think I was told that in the board there had been discussions about the idea of beginning to introduce a retreat format of some form in connection with what was then to be the International Symposium for Contemplative Science that was going to happen near Munich, Fürstenfeldbruck. And we had a couple of conversations and had the first retreat there. The idea for it really was to create a space where the contemplative element, which has always been a part of the Summer Research Institute, could get more priority than is possible during the summer school, so to speak, where there are also paper presentations and so on. So a dedicated period of time, about 2 days, where especially young early career scholars with a meditation practice or people that are quite new to meditation could come together and get to know each other, create connections, and really go a little deeper with practice in connection with the kinds of existential questions that they have about how to combine the contemplative aspects of their life and their professional life. And so that was the original idea, and that first time co-facilitating the retreat was Hanneli Augustella, who had been participating in some of the S3s as a yoga teacher, who's also a meditation teacher. So and we're good friends, we come from the same community. So I worked together with her, and the idea, another sort of basic idea with it, is that the way in which we work during the retreat, of course Buddhism runs very deeply in the DNA of Mind and Life Europe. And right now we're sitting in a very beautiful temple, Buddhist temple, at a Buddhist center, which has been very kindly hosting us last year and this year. But Mind and Life is about Mind and Life and all about Buddhism and the brain. So it's really important for us to remember that the people who come to us aren't necessarily looking for Buddhism, they aren't necessarily Buddhist, and Buddhism isn't necessarily the answer for them. So the way in which we've thought about the retreats is that they should be, as far as possible, not hide the fact that there's a profound Buddhist impulse behind it, also for me personally, but that the language we use and the kinds of practices we do are presented in as universal a language as possible. And so that's one aspect of it. So there's meditation and a lot of, substantial amount of meditative practice, formal practice. But there's the other part of it is a lot of existential exploration. So self-development, self-familiarization work that we do together. And that's, to help people use contemplative means to explore these dilemmas that they're facing in their lives and the deep longing that they have to do something in the world and for the world, and their own spiritual, interest and development. How they can find resources within themselves also to make constructive movement in that direction. So that's the overall idea, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, for me, the connection was this is my first time really being involved in the MLE Retreat from the leading side, and I've only done it so far online before. But for me, Mind Alive and Mind Alive Europe is a community of people that have some interest in not just being an academic, but also leading a contemplative life and finding out how to integrate those in some coherent whole, to really give a place to contemplation, but also not lose the academic life or whatever job they're following, but mostly academics, I would say. And that's a big puzzle. That's not there's no obvious answer there. So to have a place where you can really explore these kind of questions with other people that are in a somewhat similar situation, similar kind of maybe career backgrounds, of course different stages along the academic career, but still, I mean, on the younger side compared to a lot of other retreats that we might go to if we're a Buddhist or some other religion, where often the demographics of the retreats are the older ones. So it's nice to have people that are really in the middle of their life and to explore these questions, really relating them also to personal life experiences, to concrete things. So not to draw too much on some theories from some religion, one or the other, but really to go back to what is my own life experiences and how do I respond to situations, to people very concretely, and how does that align with the values that I have from my contemplative practice. So I think having a place to explore that is sort of a very unique kind of situation, and it's, I think, also quite connected to Francisco Varela, who, when I came across Mind Alive, I was very inspired by his idea of the scientist practitioner. And the very first Mind Alive Summer Research Institute, I remember the buzz of us, like young PhD students, sort of hearing that idea and being like, wow, how would that work? How could you actually live that? And for me, that was when the seeds was sown that I'm still trying to nurture and grow. And I think an MLE Retreat is sort of also part of that.
So, I mean, one of the basic pedagogical principles, you could say, the way we organize a retreat or structure them, is that, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, but that we really try and invite people to take as a point of departure their own experience. So we build on what they already know, because they've lived through, meeting the choices that Marieke was talking about. How do I find time for my practice if I'm doing a PhD, or how do I bring my practice in connection with the kind of research path that I'm choosing, and so on. So people have grappled with these questions, and in other situations in their lives, they've made choices and they've drawn on resources that they have. They've also encountered their own limitations, their own resistance. And so what we're doing is partly inviting them to reflect on their biography and previous experiences, and contemplatively really go quite deeply into that exploration and draw out some insights for themselves that are not coming from a theoretical perspective, from any normative religious or philosophical tradition, but that are fundamental to what it means to be human in our time. So what they discover, because we then have them share insights, a lot of things we invite them to keep private, but also there's a lot of sharing. And they recognize in each other that the kinds of dilemmas, of course, are very similar, and the kinds of opportunities that people have used, and the kinds of ways in which they've found solutions for certain things can be very inspiring, and they can also remind them of the fact that they're not alone on this journey. So the idea is really, it's not so much about teaching people things, but it's helping them discover what is already there. And then from that we can make connections, and people themselves can make connections to the contemplative traditions and the theoretical perspectives, the philosophical views that they've been familiar with already before they came. And then we can talk about those also. But that's not the main point. So it's not really a teaching retreat. It's a space for self-exploration together with others, which makes certain processes possible that otherwise would be very difficult to make space for in your own life, and you would miss the sounding board of the other's experiences. And then the contemplative practice around it that sort of permeates the whole process, more sort of quiet sitting practice and certain kinds of meditation exercises that we do, practices, creates a kind of container, like an alchemical vessel within which this can unfold. And what has surprised us really over the years that we've been doing this, both in person, this is the third one in person, and online community practice days and retreats, is how deeply people are willing and able to go in such a short time, and how much many people find that they get out of it, that actually helps them both not feeling as alone with these dilemmas as they may do. In some cases they feel they're the only person in their country, not in their continent. And so there's something really empowerment in just coming together and then discovering some of your answers are already in your experience. You just haven't thought about them maybe in that way. And then we're not telling people that's it or that's it. They discover it. And actually there's a lot of sharing between participants. There isn't that much sharing with us, which I think is important.
And maybe just to give a different level of description of the retreats, also since I've been sort of coming a little bit more from the outside, maybe provide a different perspective. So we're starting the day typically with an hour of sitting, but also body work of some sort. So that would be gentle stretches, a little bit of gentle movement, nothing dramatic, but the body work is very important to help also people really connect to their lived experience. Because if they get too much only into their head, then it's more easy to just focus on the theoretical aspects and the theories of how you should live or think or how your mind should work, whereas when you're in your body it helps you to really ground that very, very much. And then every session pretty much will start with about 15-20 minutes of meditation, maybe also a bit of body work, just feeling into what's needed. And then we would prepare some kind of a question that we would explore together. And these are driven also by the themes of the retreats and by the themes of the year of Mind and Life. So this year we looked into the idea of care, which is part of the 3-year arc of Mind and Life Europe. And also responsibility, which is very much the theme of the European Summer Research Institute. So we took these two concepts and then we turned those into questions. So for care, for example, we explored just the experience of receiving care, the experience of giving care, and then how does that feel like? And then, what are the kind of things that come up? And those seem very simple questions, but when you really explore them contemplatively a lot, there's a lot of richness in there that's almost, very deeply also connect to your personal values and challenges and so on. And then people would go through a period of reflecting on questions, journaling, and then typically we would put them into small groups to share whatever they wanted to share. Of course, we also actively encourage them not to share things that they don't feel they want to share, so that's completely fine as well. And then we would encourage them to maybe bring up if there are certain things that bubbled up in these conversations, and then we'd move on for the next topic. So that's sort of the flow of the thing.
What's kind of important for the retreat idea is that the overall arc, the 3-year arc, is caring for life, which is huge. And what people come to the retreat with, like many people in our societies these days, is a huge amount of concern about the state of the planet, the amount of suffering, the return of war to Europe. So there are all these large issues that can feel really overwhelming. So one could do a retreat, and to some extent S3 will be about this, the very large questions. And there will be very many people, and there will be many people presenting, and so we can reflect on these issues like we do on a daily basis, and be more, careful about what we are talking about and how we talk about it. What we try to do in the retreat is to take things from this universal level, which may have been what motivated them to come to S3 this year, and bring it down to the very, very personal, micro, everyday kind of living questions for people. And so we didn't actually ask people, to reflect on the state of the world. That may have been what they were reflecting on, because that was what they came to the retreat with. But then we brought them to think about, so what does care really mean? And one of the things that was interesting and surprising, not surprising really, but it was interesting for people to hear from each other, that for some people, receiving care was a challenge, and it was so much easier to give care. Whereas for other people, it was the other way around. And of course then, there may be a story behind why that is for you, but what does it feel, what is that resistance and how does that feel? Is a way of beginning to acknowledge the fact that is how it is for you, and beginning maybe to be able to move that a little bit. So we really took it to a very, very personal and private micro phenomenology really of care. And then from that was the first day, and we ended up in this, in the morning with the late morning about care, and in all these different forms of care and caring. And in the afternoon we began to work more with responsibility. And by the end of the day, you could sense that people had, been in touch with pretty deep aspects of their being and their history, positive and more challenging aspects. Then, people go to bed, and then the second day we went the other way. So we went from these personal experiences and the insights that they had gained. So by talking about the kinds of qualities, asking people to explore the kinds of qualities that they see in themselves when they were, for example, taking responsibility or giving care or receiving care, being given responsibility and feeling a kind of resistance to that, or the sense of not having taken a responsibility where maybe you should have, all these aspects that have to do with individual personal qualities. By working with those, then we invited them the second day to, in a way, take the lessons from those insights about themselves to apply them to the question that they came to the retreat with, and what they would like to do with, in the direction that they would like to move with their lives. And so the exploration isn't about, how do I save the world, or who should do that, which can be very overwhelming, but in my life, how have I ended up in this particular place, and what kinds of qualities do I know I have, and which ones do I think maybe I want to develop more, but that I recognize in others, that might help me to make these small steps in the direction where I would like to go. And I think it both helps people to see something of the power of contemplative practice, taking a break, creating a safe environment for yourself to explore these questions, and that the help of others can be useful to structure that process, but really it's something you're doing on your own. So the answer isn't out there. You can be inspired, and you can get conceptual tools and theoretical understandings, but this inner work is really something that you do for yourself, and others are sometimes needed, but certainly useful in that context. But the answer has to be, for it to be real for people, I really think it has to come, ultimately, it has to resonate with them very deeply, not as an idea, but as a felt quality.
Yeah, and that also reminds me that there are two other important ingredients of the MLE retreats. One is silence. So after breakfast on the first day, we went into silence, which we maintained really until the end of the retreat, and that helps people, especially during these periods, during the breaks. Actually, I think probably a lot of the work is really happening there, when you're just sitting there, having your meal, walking around, and all these impressions just do their thing. And that's also what's happening at night. So we always give them a nighttime practice to reconnect them to the practice. and to each other in a very beautiful way. And then there is something that can happen in the night, and in the morning there might be some new ideas or insight, or at least the experiences will have settled into the mind-body complex. And I think for me, one interesting thing that came up was the multidimensionality of responsibility. So when you just hear the word responsibility, and I think also when a lot of people who were attending the retreat heard responsibility, it felt very heavy. But then through our exploration together, this intersubjective nature and enactive nature of responsibility really came up, which sort of made it feel that at once you can never be completely responsible by yourself for anything, because anything is dependent on so many other factors and other people, and at the same time you are always affecting so many things that you're even not so aware of. And just to get in touch mentally and physically with that idea, I think was also a very interesting realization that came out of the group also. And then it allows you to shift your perspective also of how you bring that back into your life, and the maybe small actions that we invited people to come up with at the end, like what is one very concrete small step that you can take after this retreat.
I think one of the important ingredients is that, so just now we talked about these individual processes that we invite people to, these individual journeys we help people move along during these 2 days. But as Marieke was also saying, there is this important collective aspect to it. And so in different ways by the sharing, of course, people get to know each other, and by sitting together something can emerge. The nighttime practice is another tool. One thing that is a really important ingredient, I think, has become an important ingredient, is that two things. One is the presence of, I think there probably were about 10 or 12 out of the 40-something participants who had been participating in earlier in-person retreats. And they bring a particular kind of understanding with each other and with me as one who's been there all the time, which makes it much easier for the other people in the retreat who are first-timers to get a sense of, it's okay, you can relax, and that it helps. It's like the sourdough for the retreat group. And the other thing that was, I think, I think it worked better than in other years to some extent. It felt to me that the presence of quite a small number of substantially more senior people, so age-wise, but also life experience-wise, it was a really good mix in the sense that those people provide a life wisdom aspect in these small groups, and so there is the overwhelming, or the largest share, the largest proportion of people are young people, which I think is really important. But the presence of a few, people that are a little older is really important, because also in these conversations there can be inspiration drawn from, how have these people managed or not managed to solve some of these questions. So that seemed to work really well as well this year.
Yeah, especially when those people, they are also teachers in their own rights. Many of them are very serious practitioners, but they wouldn't dominate the conversation, so they're just the silent forces in the room that really, they're then part of the sourdough, but that's also really important. So it becomes really still about the experience of especially the junior people, but there is a little bit of tinges of ideas maybe that are different because of the different life experience that are in the room.
And then what's also really important is that, as I mentioned earlier, and as Marieke also said, we whenever we've done a little reflection exercise and before we go into sharing, we always invite people to to think about things that they don't want to share, so that you've thought about what you don't want to share, and then it's more likely that you don't regret what you're sharing later. But there are certain exercises that we did where we don't share at all, and those are, for example, the individual qualities, your qualities, both the positive and the more challenging aspects of your character, the way you are in your life. Those, we invite people to just keep private, and that's for them, to avoid, in a way, the kinds of dynamics that could emerge if you were sharing that publicly. The other thing we ask people not to share, during the retreat at least, is where we end, which is, what is this small step that you could make? Because again, there it's really important that this is something for you, and you don't have to, you're welcome to tell somebody about it afterwards, but in a way, there shouldn't be any need. It's really a personal commitment to do something that moves you in the right direction. And so, an important aspect in general of these retreats is the safety, the feeling of safety that people get, because we really go into this very, very personal stuff. And of course, for some people, they're getting into contact with things that are difficult, and for that to be ethically responsible and in general responsible, we need to have a group of people that are respectful of that, of these kinds of processes happening, and don't begin to interfere, so to speak, either with care or so there is this sort of a mutual agreement where whatever happens for people is welcome, and we need to look out for each other, and what happens in the retreat stays in the retreat. So we have an agreement that whatever people tell you, you cannot share with anybody else unless that person gives you the permission to share it with somebody else. And that's like the basic rule that everybody, we have an actual raising your hand kind of thing to make sure that this is something that we really take very seriously. Because if that trust or that bubble that we create gets punctured, it basically destroys the purpose of the retreat, and it really would be awful. And we've never had that happen. So far it's been really, really good. But the sense of security, of safety, the multiplicity of voices, the differences of, we had 24 countries, I think, represented among 40 people. And so you can tell that, there's this universal human predicament that we're all facing in one form or another. But what that means concretely is extremely different depending on who you are, where you live, the language repertoire you have to talk, the word responsibility also, and care. We invited people to think about, when they were doing the reflection, translate it into their language, and if they knew more languages, then to try out what would be the equivalent, because that gives you a sense of the different shades of meaning that pull certain things more forward and other things recede into the background, that are important to have a sense of when you're thinking about what does it really mean? What do we mean? What do I mean? What have I felt as what responsibility means or what care is? And so the diversity is an important element as well. And I think that diversity combined with the homogeneity, the relative homogeneity of people being, for the most part, early career, younger academics or practitioners, in clinical professions and so on, is that it's really a very unique constellation, and I think that's what I hear a little bit from people who participated, that it's an extremely empowering and enriching experience just to meet those people and to hear those voices.
Yeah, and I think also it provides just more generally a very unique kind of community, because sometimes it can be a bit lonely when you're at the university and you're the only one in your department or even at the university that is trying to do these things. So to have other people that are trying similar things is really very, very helpful.
Then the other thing that I think is important is that because the in-person retreat has always only been once a year, and in fact we couldn't have one during the pandemic, of course, we have an online retreat usually every year also, and we have community practice days, and they're kind of irregular, but they are usually we do them from 11 to 5 on a weekend, usually a Saturday. And it starts at 11 because we have people participating from the US and India, and so it's very global. And we spend the day basically with the same structure as a retreat, but doing some practice together, having some sharing, and then finishing off at some point at the end of the day. And it's a way of keeping in touch and to keep this contemplative connection going in a way. So, and I know that people find that extremely useful and nice, to meet each other online also. So that's something that we're also talking about a little bit, how we can, maybe build on that. But it's important that people, it's not a one-off experience and then, you're on your own for the next 50 years or for the whole year. So we try and strike a balance between giving people the time to explore what the retreat did for them, which really requires time on their own with their own lives. And community is important, but if we do too much nursing, we're kind of smothering these individual processes. And of course people are connecting with each other and they may be in touch with each other. But I think as facilitators in Mind and Life Europe, creating the container is important, and then to a large extent what needs to happen within a container after the retreat is up to people themselves, and we can create a Slack space or something else where people can meet. But the intervention, so to speak, from facilitators with practice days or online retreats, it shouldn't be too often, is the experience from my community also, that there's something about self-reliance which is also important. And so getting people out of the sense of being alone, but at the same time, not taking their personal power and responsibility away from them. Striking the balance is not easy, but I think it's important.
Yeah, and I think what I also very much appreciate is that it's in a way a very efficient kind of model. That sounds very strange, but in the sense that we are focused on very specific questions, so that allows you to go very deep, because otherwise, very often with contemplative teachings, you're on your own of how to bring this into life, or if you just have a general conversation with people, you might hit on those people, like those topics. I mean, with especially when you're talking with other contemplative academics, but you never know. It can just go everywhere, and I think this model really allows you to quite quickly zoom into what's going on. And it's important, I think, to have that kind of a space, because if you're in an academic world, there's so much pressure on producing things and needing to accomplish this and that and progressing your career, and so it's really a tremendous challenge. As John Kabat-Zinn, I think, also says that it's a radical act of it's quite a radical act to just sit down and contemplate on your cushion, right? That we shouldn't underestimate that, especially when you're in this very high pressure competitive climate. So to have a place that supports that and says, yes, it is important, you're not crazy that you're doing this, you just need to be reminded again and again. At least that's for me, that's the case for sure.
Yeah, and on the more sort of meditation instruction type work that we do during the retreat, I mean, one of the things that I emphasize really is, as Marieke was also saying, is grounding. So there is so a lot of the research has been on mindfulness, and so the important benefits of mindfulness practice and similar kinds of traditional contemplative practices for helping people stabilize their mind, being able to recenter and focus, and the health benefits that come with that, which has been really important. But there is also another side of research which is very much about the very exciting, more on the edge of the scientific worldview, so to speak. So extraordinary meditation experiences induced by meditation, or as a consequence of psychedelics and so on, and we'll be talking about that at ESRI also. And that is important research. But there is a bit of a tendency, because we're Westerners, people from the modern world, we and as Marieke was saying, efficiency in delivering, it's like, is this the best practice I could be doing to get to that point where I want that, because apparently that's what it's about. And in a way to slow things down and bring it down to a more realistic and real understanding of the slowness of progress in contemplative work. And that, for most people, most of the time. And that experiences may you may get different kinds of meditative experiences, profound peace, quietness, feeling of love, spontaneously streaming, whatever it is, energy, sensations, images maybe sometimes. All these things these kinds of things may happen, but they're not what it's about. And rather than neither pushing them away or ignoring them, but on the other hand, not wanting them or thinking that that's what it's about, is really an important qualification. And my sense is that when I look at what goes on in online communities, for example, there is so much emphasis on people just want to get to what it's really about. And we've been trying to emphasize also is that it's the journey that is the goal in a way, right? So, as Francisco Varela also said, citing I forget the name of the poet, but it's you're laying down a path in walking. So it's creating your own path and pacing yourself and appreciating where you are when you are there, not already thinking about where you want to be next. Is really important. And so the practical grounding through different kinds of physical exercises, and we do, in this case, gentle movement. Other retreats we've done yin yoga and things like that. Whatever kind of physical exercise people want to do, and if they can bring a contemplative element into it by being mindful of their movements as they do them, then that is really, really important. And it's something that is sometimes not sufficiently emphasized in more traditional settings. But the grounding, especially for people like us who are very much in our heads, because we're academics and we are always on the news feeds, it's a really important part of the practice. And sometimes people get surprised. I know that was in some of the evaluations in earlier retreats, how much emphasis we put on the body. But people usually have often discovered something in the course of the retreat, how much better their how much benefit they get from remembering their body, so to speak. So, demystifying and...
Yeah, and also starting to appreciate that the academic life doesn't necessarily have to be an impediment for contemplative practice, because in the end, whatever you cultivate in the cushion, it's about how you then use that and as you interact with your fellow workers or with your PhD advisor, or as you go about, or how you respond to another rejection of your paper. This is where you can then actually be applied practice. But of course, it's not easy. This is the really hard part of practice. So we need all the support we can get to work with that, and certainly do. It's for me also a daily sort of challenge to figure out the balance between how much time can I dedicate to practice, and how much time how do I spend my academic career, what kind of choices do I make for the shape this career takes to be in line with my values as a person, and also a person trying to have a solid contemplative dimension to my life as well. So it's a continuous, like Elizabeth Matis-Nambiao calls it, like an open question. I kind of like that idea. It's also not ever settled, right? It's again this idea of laying down the path and walking. So we're constantly also switching and adjusting, and this is why doing these retreats regularly is also helpful, because then you can check like how am I doing right now, and maybe this is a time to switch. As you also a scientific path is a evolving path, and eventually you, at least for me, it was quite interesting to slowly realize that I'm switching from being an early career researcher to maybe a mid-career researcher. That sort of some of those things happens almost without you noticing it, and then you have to adapt and reflect, and so this is the really interesting also process, but it's not obvious because there is nowhere that the book gives the answers. No, you have to find the answers within you, within your own heart and mind. And body too, actually, and so the body can also often give a lot of this information. I mean, that's why we call it a gut instinct or things like that.
Yeah, I think many of us have this. What you were just talking about, how your status in life changes. So you go from being a promising young researcher or the cool new faculty member to one of the old farts pretty quickly. And it's very true that Marieke also says that the way you relate to if you're teaching, your students and to the people that you meet in your daily life, that's really where the practice is, and particularly when you get challenged. People annoy you. That's where the measure of your practice is, basically. And I think during the retreat you cited Chiganima Rinpoche having said something about, if you want to see the measure of your practice, Tugorgin Rinpoche used to say that as well, my teacher said it as well, just see whether there's a little bit more kindness and a little bit less reactivity. That's where the progress is, and not whether you have some, fantastic experience sometimes, although they can be inspiring. So working with the heart has been another, it's always a very central element in the practice that we do. And again, taking as a point of departure concrete experiences and relationships of love and care and gratitude in particular, and the connection between those. In the course of the retreat, really what we're doing is using, I always use a number of different gateways. You could see the body, the breath, the heart, the mind, and the infinite sort of creativity of life as ways into a sense of, what David Bohm calls a sense for the whole. And that basic principle, so you use a number of these or the whole set of them, and there are lots of different ways you can do it. You can use that structure from the most basic beginner exercises, mindfulness type things, sense your body, find your position, notice your breathing. You're using your mind already to do that kind of work, and then what is going on in your mind, get a sense of the space and so on. So we use the different elements as a way of tuning into, a deeper sense of who you are or what you are, and then we can put themes in that to go deeper, and they're all in a way ways of peeling away some of the layers of necessary protection that we have built up in the course of our lives, and to allow our hearts to open a little bit more, partly to be able to let some of those deeper qualities that we all have manifest more easily, but also to discover for ourselves the answers to many of the questions that we think we need to ask a teacher about. It's not because you don't have benefit from teachers and need them at some point. We have lots of teachers all the time. But that kind of opening of the heart in that way is the sort of the more straight meditative, contemplative aspect of the retreat. And what is always enormously rewarding and moving and beautiful is to what an extent people are willing and able to do that in the course of such a short period of time together. And it creates a bond between people, is my impression, that when they meet again after a year or sometimes after several years, there is a real connection because they've had that experience and they've actually been in that space together. They've taken that risk, so to speak. And so apart from all what we talked about, the existential exploration of your real life situation, there is this deeper aspect to the retreat as well. That it just gets woven into, in a way, the work that we're doing. And when it works, it's beautiful.
Mm.